The world had always seemed bigger than anyone could truly understand. Cities buzzed with the usual chaos, children ran freely in narrow streets, and parents carried the weight of everyday struggles. But in a quiet corner of the city, a secret was unfolding, one that nobody had imagined could touch their lives so deeply. It started on a warm afternoon when the sun hung lazily above, casting a golden glow on the pavement. People moved about as usual, unaware that beyond the human eye, someone or something was watching. It began with whispers, faint and almost imperceptible. Those whispers belonged to beings no one had ever seen before, beings who had been observing Earth for reasons humans could not yet understand. They had arrived silently, moving with a precision that made them almost invisible. And yet, they were not here for the cities, the cars, or the lights. They were here for something far more delicate: the children. In one particular neighborhood, the laughter of children filled the air. They ran through narrow alleyways, their small feet striking the pavement in rapid rhythm. Their world was one, of innocence, of scraped knees and shared secrets, a world untouched by the darker realities that often loomed nearby. But that world was about to collide with something entirely unfamiliar. The first signs were subtle. A sudden hush would fall when the children played, as if a shadow had passed over the sun. Toys would move slightly, almost as if nudged by invisible hands. And the adults, mothers, fathers, teachers, and neighbors, felt a growing unease, a creeping sense that something unseen was intruding into their lives. Some dismissed it as imagination, others as coincidence, but the children noticed. Children always notice. One afternoon, a group of children ventured slightly further than usual, chasing a bright red ball that had rolled across the cracked pavement into the abandoned lot at the edge of the neighborhood. The lot was overgrown, filled with weeds and rusting metal, a place where few dared to linger. But the ball was a magnet, pulling the children closer to the unknown. And that was when the first real contact happened. From the tall grass, they saw them, figures unlike anything they had ever imagined. They were tall, their shapes luminous and almost fragile, with eyes that seemed to hold the depth of the universe. The children froze, caught between fear and fascination. One of them, the smallest of the group, reached out instinctively, and the figures responded in a way that no one could explain. They did not speak words humans could hear, yet a message passed through the air like a gentle vibration, a plea that was both urgent and sorrowful. You must not, the beings seemed to say. You must not take them. But humans, in their quest for understanding, had already begun to interfere. Scientists had noticed anomalies, strange readings that could not be explained by weather, by machinery, or by any natural phenomena. They acted out of curiosity and ambition, believing that what they did would lead to knowledge, perhaps even advancement. They did not consider the cost, the lives that could be affected, the innocence that could be shattered. The children were taken. It was quick, efficient, almost clinical. One moment they were running and laughing. The next they were enclosed in a place of sterile walls and monitored spaces, a cage of human design. For the adults, the shock was unbearable, the guilt impossible to ignore. Questions hung in the air, like storm clouds. How could this happen? Who was responsible? Could anyone make it right? And all the while, the beings watched, their eyes reflecting a mixture of anger and sorrow. They had not intended to start a war with humans, but in their view, a moral line had been crossed. Protecting the innocent was not just a principle, it was a necessity, a law written in the fabric of their existence. And seeing children confined, frightened, and confused was a pain they could not ignore. As the days passed, the world outside carried on with a fragile normalcy. But inside the walls of that human-made cage, the children whispered to one another, sharing stories of what they had seen and heard. Some spoke of shadows that seemed to comfort them, of fleeting glimpses of figures at the edge of their vision, shapes that gave them hope when all else seemed lost. Their fear was constant, but so too was their resilience. The adults who had captured them began to notice something strange. The children were changing, not in obvious ways, but in subtle shifts that suggested a deeper awareness. They spoke differently, reacted differently, as if their minds had opened to a reality that adults could barely comprehend. The scientists, who monitored them, felt a mixture of awe and terror, for they were not prepared for what was emerging. Outside, the beings debated their next move. Some argued for intervention, for taking direct action to return the children safely to their homes. Others counseled patience, urging that humanity might yet recognize its mistake and act before it was too late. But time was slipping away, and with each passing hour, the innocence of the children was at risk. The story of that neighborhood, that group of children, and the unseen watchers had only just begun. It was a tale of fear and hope, of moral dilemmas that stretched beyond human understanding. And at its heart was a question that no one could answer easily. What does it mean to truly protect those who cannot protect themselves? And how far would anyone go to correct a wrong that had already been done? Even as part one closed, the tension was palpable. The world outside remained unaware of the fragile lives hanging in the balance, of the silent beings who watched and mourned, and of the human error that had set these events into motion. But one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The story was just beginning, and the journey ahead promised challenges, discoveries, and revelations that would test the very core of what it meant to be human. The days inside the strange, cold facility felt longer than anyone could count. The children had been confined for what seemed like forever, though only hours had passed. Their laughter had disappeared, replaced by a quiet murmur of worry and whispered questions. Each child struggled to understand why they had been taken, why the world they knew had vanished in a single moment, and what would happen next. They clung to one another, forming small pockets of comfort in a place that offered none. Outside, the humans who had captured them were busy with measurements, tests, and experiments. Machines beeped and whirred constantly, recording heartbeats, breathing, and even thoughts in ways the children could not fully comprehend. To the adults in charge, this was a pursuit of knowledge. But to the children, it was terrifying, confusing, and unfair. They didn't understand why curiosity had turned into a cage. Among the children, a quiet bravery began to grow. One of them, a thoughtful boy with curious eyes, began to ask questions that others were too afraid to voice. "Why are they keeping us here?" he whispered one day, his voice barely audible over the hum of machines. "What did we do?" The others looked at him, hoping for answers, but he had none. All he could do was stare out at the walls and imagine the sunlight beyond them. Meanwhile, the unseen beings who had first tried to warn humanity were becoming more active. They hovered just beyond the edges of human awareness, their forms shimmering, faintly in places where only the sharpest eyes could see them. They could not enter the facility directly. It was protected by human technology, but they found other ways to communicate. At night, they would send visions, fleeting images in dreams of open fields of laughter, of freedom. They wanted the children to know that they were not entirely alone. One night, a child awoke from a restless sleep to see a figure at the corner of the room. It was tall, luminous, and unmistakably not human. The child blinked, unsure if it was real, but the figure remained, extending what could be called a hand. The gesture was gentle, almost pleading. Though no words were spoken, the message was clear. Do not lose hope, you will be safe. Help is coming. The presence comforted the child, and soon the story spread quietly among the other children. Some were skeptical, too frightened to believe in anything beyond the walls, but others felt a strange sense of reassurance. They whispered to one another, creating tiny sparks of courage in a place designed to crush it. In the darkest hours, those sparks became their shield. As days passed, the humans who monitored them began to notice unusual patterns. The children were talking to one another in ways that the scientists couldn't explain. They were solving problems, noticing details, and reacting to circumstances that had never been part of their prior knowledge. A simple puzzle, placed in front of them as part of an experiment, was solved in minutes, not hours. Charts that measured their brain, Activity showed spikes of creativity and focus that no one anticipated. This caught the attention of one of the lead researchers. She had always believed that children could learn, adapt, and surprise adults, but even she was shocked by the level of intuition and resilience the children were showing. It was as if something unseen had given them a deeper understanding, a silent guide that humans could neither see nor measure. She began to wonder, was this purely human potential, or was there something else influencing them? Back in the hidden world outside, the beings were growing restless. They had watched for days as the children endured fear, uncertainty, and confinement. Some of the humans involved seemed genuinely unaware of the moral weight of their actions. Others, however, were aware but felt trapped by ambition, funding, or fear of losing control. The beings debated how to intervene without causing panic or harm, how to act in a world so rigidly bound by human rules. One afternoon, a small miracle occurred. A child who had been silent since the start, withdrawn and fearful, spoke up. "I saw them again," she said, voice trembling. "The ones outside, they're waiting for us. They won't let anything happen to us." The other children leaned in, eyes wide. They wanted to believe, needed to believe that someone outside cared enough to act. And in that shared belief, courage began to grow. The facility, despite its technology and walls, could not suppress human empathy. Some of the workers began to treat the children with small acts of kindness. A warm blanket, a gentle word, a quiet smile. It was nothing extraordinary, yet it became monumental in that sterile environment. For the children, these small gestures reminded them that even within the harshest circumstances, humans were capable of care. At night, the dreams became more vivid. The luminous beings appeared often, leading the children through imagined landscapes of green meadows, flowing rivers, and skies unclouded by fear. The children could feel the wind, smell the flowers, and hear the laughter of others who were free. Each dream was a reminder that the world outside still existed, that their lives were not confined to metal walls and scientific observation. The humans in charge remained unaware of the growing bond between the children and the unseen watchers. They continued their routines, oblivious to the subtle shifts in behavior that were taking place. The children were learning, adapting, and quietly planning. They talked in whispers about the world beyond, about ways to survive, about how to hold on to hope until help arrived. In their small acts of defiance, sharing stories, comforting one another, keeping track of time, they reclaimed a sense of control in a world designed to remove it. As the days turned into nights and back into days, tension grew. The beings outside knew they had limited time. Humans were unpredictable, capable of kindness but also capable of cruelty in the name of discovery. And every day that passed was another day the children remained in uncertainty. But they also knew that their efforts were making a difference. Even without direct contact, they could give guidance, instill courage, and remind the children of their right to freedom. By the end of Part 2, the story was at a delicate balance. Fear and hope existed side by side. The humans believed they were in control, yet the children were quietly discovering strength they had never known. And just beyond reach, the Watchers, the beings who had first warned humanity, prepared to take steps that could change everything. The story continued to unfold, a slow, careful dance between human ambition, the innocence of childhood, and a moral force that refused to be ignored. The world outside went about its business, unaware that lives were suspended in a quiet, invisible battle of patience, courage, and compassion. But within the walls, a spark had been lit, one that would grow, one that could not be contained, and one that promised that no matter what humans had done, the fight for the children's freedom was only just beginning. Inside the cold metallic walls of the facility, the children began to understand something important. They were not powerless. Fear had been their first reaction, confusion the second, but now a quiet strength was taking root. They started noticing patterns in the routines of the humans who watched them, small gaps in the schedule, moments when the doors were left slightly ajar, or when guards became distracted. With every observation, hope grew a little more. The luminous beings outside continued to watch, always present yet always distant. They could not step inside directly, yet they sent subtle guidance. Dreams became clearer, visions sharper, and sometimes the children felt a gentle pressure, almost like a hand brushing against theirs, not physical, but real, in a way that touched their hearts. "You can do this," the message seemed to say. "Hold on and do not give up." One child, who had been quiet for most of the time, began to speak more, sharing ideas with the others. "If we pay attention," the child said softly, "we can figure out when the doors open. We can understand their patterns. We might find a way to move." The other children listened, hearts beating faster with both fear and anticipation. It was the first spark of a plan, small but powerful, born out of necessity. Meanwhile, the humans in charge were beginning to notice subtle changes in the children. They were more alert, more coordinated, more aware than expected. The scientists attributed it to stress or adaptation, unaware that the children were receiving guidance beyond human understanding. Attempts to provoke reactions through tests and puzzles became less effective. The children were learning, not just reacting. And with learning came strategy, and with strategy came hope. The evenings brought both fear and comfort. Shadows stretched. Across the walls, the machines hummed tirelessly, and the air sometimes felt heavier than it should. Yet in dreams, the children found brief freedom. Fields of green, rivers sparkling in sunlight, and distant mountains. These visions were more than dreams. They were instructions in disguise. Sometimes one child would awaken with a sudden clarity, recalling small details or ideas that could help the group, and they would whisper them to the others. One day, something unexpected happened. A guard, new and inexperienced accidentally, left a door unlocked for a few moments. The children noticed immediately. Their eyes met in silent agreement. It was dangerous, frightening, yet it was also an opportunity. They did not act recklessly, but carefully, quietly, like shadows moving through the room. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. Courage had become their weapon. Outside the facility, the luminous beings continued their silent vigil. They could feel the children's determination, their growing understanding of their environment, and they knew the time for a stronger intervention was approaching. They whispered through dreams and through intuition, guiding without touching, teaching without speaking. The children responded instinctively, as if they had always known how to trust this unseen support. Inside, the scientists grew increasingly curious. They had never seen children adapt so quickly. Attempts to record responses became futile. The children anticipated patterns, solved problems too fast, and sometimes even seemed to influence the machines in ways no one could explain. Anxiety began to creep into the human hearts. Some realized that their actions, though intended for learning, had crossed a line. Others clung to the belief that knowledge justified control, even when moral questions gnawed quietly at them. Back. In the room where the children gathered in the evenings, a plan began to take shape. It was not reckless. It was careful, cautious, and built on observation. They would wait for the right moment, when the humans were distracted, when the pattern of doors, cameras, and shifts aligned perfectly. Every detail mattered, every second counted. They whispered to each other, practicing movements, rehearsing steps, and quietly instilling courage in the most fearful among them. The tension grew. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow suspicious. Yet within that tension, the children found unity. They shared stories of courage, of hope, of what the world outside could be. They reminded each other that they were not alone, that somewhere out there beings watched over them, and that eventually, someone or something would intervene. It was this belief that gave them strength, even when fear tried to dominate. One night, a child noticed a strange occurrence, a faint shimmer along one wall, almost like sunlight reflected in water. The others saw it too, and instinctively they moved closer. They could not touch it, yet it made their hearts race. The shimmer felt like a sign, a reminder that help was near. The luminous beings were trying to communicate more directly now, signaling a moment when action might be possible, signaling that patience had its limits. Inside the human world, small cracks began to appear in the system. The scientists argued among themselves, some questioning the morality of their actions. One adult quietly wondered if they had gone too far, if curiosity had blinded them to the human cost. Doubts grew, and with doubt came mistakes. Mistakes that the children noticed immediately. Observation had become their secret weapon, and now, human errors began to open doors, literally and figuratively. The first attempt at movement came one evening. A child carefully approached the slightly open door, glancing back at the others. Hearts pounded. Every step was slow, deliberate. The group moved as one, quietly, cautiously. The human world was unaware that these small, seemingly insignificant children were weaving through routines and machines with precision that amazed even the unseen watchers. Outside, the luminous beings felt their excitement grow, but also their concern. Any direct intervention was still impossible without risking harm. Yet in this moment they could see the children taking charge of their fate. Using courage, intelligence, and unity, they whispered encouragement through dreams, their energy a quiet force behind each movement. "You are strong. You are brave. You can do this." The first real step of action passed almost unnoticed by the humans, but to the children, it was monumental. It was proof that fear could be overcome, that hope was not just an idea but a tangible force. From that step, momentum began to build. They learned to read the patterns of humans and machines alike, learning the weaknesses, timing, and opportunities that would lead to further steps. Yet, despite progress, danger remained. The humans were unpredictable, capable of sudden decisions that could undo everything. The children had to remain careful even as courage surged through them, and the luminous beings remained vigilant, providing guidance and subtle hints, never touching, never interfering directly, but always ensuring that the children felt their presence. By the end of Part 3, the balance had shifted slightly. The children were no longer passive captives. They were active participants in their fate. Fear and hope danced together, creating a tension that drove every decision. Outside, the luminous beings prepared for the next phase, knowing that the right moment would soon arrive. Inside, the humans remained oblivious to the growing independence and cunning of the children. The story was moving toward a turning point. The next steps would require courage, intelligence, and faith. The children had learned to trust one another, to trust the unseen, and to believe that freedom was possible. The stage was set for a confrontation between human control and moral responsibility, between fear and courage, between captivity and the natural right to safety and freedom. And as the nights passed, as the dreams continued to offer guidance and hope, one truth became clear to everyone involved. Humanity's understanding of right and wrong would be tested, the children's resilience would be challenged, and the unseen watchers would play a role in shaping the outcome. The story was far from over, and what happened next would determine not just the fate of these children, but the moral compass of those who had dared to take them. The children had spent days learning, observing, and quietly planning. Fear still lingered, but now it was mixed with determination. They had realized that surviving meant more than simply waiting for help. It meant acting, thinking, and trusting one another. Every small success, every careful movement had built a confidence they never knew they had. And now, the moment for a bolder step was approaching. One evening, as the sun set outside the facility, painting the walls in shades of orange and gold, the children gathered in a corner of their room. They spoke in whispers, voices trembling but steady. "We can't wait any longer," one said. "We need to see if we can move farther tonight. If we wait too long, we might miss the right time." The others nodded. They had all felt it. The invisible push from the beings outside, a gentle insistence that the moment had come. The humans, still caught in their routines, were unaware of the growing tension. Some were lost in paperwork or reports, others busy monitoring screens, and a few walked the hallways distractedly. The children had memorized their habits, their small mistakes, and the gaps in their attention. They had learned patience, and now it was time to put it into action. It began with the quietest movement, One child slipped from the group and crept toward a door that had been left slightly open. Heart pounding, the child froze every few steps, listening for any sound, scanning for any hint of awareness, then carefully the others followed. They moved like shadows, soft and deliberate, blending into the walls, avoiding any sudden movement that could draw attention. As they passed the first checkpoint, a strange sensation filled the air. It was not fear, nor exactly hope, but something in between, a vibration that seemed to come from the unseen beings outside. The children felt it in their chests, like a quiet energy guiding them. Without words, they understood. They were on the right path. The first major obstacle came quickly. A locked door blocked their way, a barrier of metal and mechanism that seemed impossible to bypass. Panic threatened to take hold, but one of the children remembered the lessons from their observations. The humans sometimes left small openings in the panels, places where a hand could slip through or a tool could be used. Working together, quietly, carefully, the children managed to manipulate the lock, feeling a small but exhilarating rush as the door swung open. Beyond the door was a long corridor, bright and sterile, filled with sounds of distant machinery and footsteps echoing from unseen hallways. The children pressed close to the walls, holding each other's hands when necessary, whispering encouragement. Every sound made them flinch. Every shadow was a potential threat, but the bond among them grew stronger with each step. Fear became a tool, sharpening their senses instead of paralyzing them. Meanwhile, outside the facility, the luminous beings hovered closer, their presence stronger, more insistent. They could not enter, but their guidance became clearer. Dreams and visions now served as instructions: which path to take, where to pause, how to avoid detection. The children sensed these nudges instinctively, moving as though guided by an invisible hand. They began to trust not only each other but the unseen force that had been silently watching over them from the very beginning. Inside the facility, humans began to notice small irregularities. Screens flickered briefly, some data readings were off, and a few workers sensed a strange shift in the children's behavior. Yet none of them realized how close the children were to escaping. Their curiosity and preoccupation blinded them to the courage quietly unfolding in the corner of the building. The corridor ended at a stairwell, steep and narrow, leading to an exit that might finally open the way to freedom. The children paused, hearts pounding, eyes wide with fear and hope. "We have to be careful," one whispered. "If anyone sees us now, it's over." They descended slowly, hands gripping each other, every step deliberate. The stairwell felt endless, each landing a test of nerve and determination. At the bottom, the final door loomed, guarded not by a lock but by human presence. A few staff members walked past, talking casually, unaware of the imminent challenge. The children huddled together, trying to figure out the safest way past without being noticed. Time seemed to stretch, seconds feeling like minutes, yet they moved with quiet confidence honed by days of careful observation and planning. Suddenly a child tripped, making a soft noise that could have alerted the humans. Hearts jumped, breaths caught, but a hand reached out from behind, steadying the stumble. They froze for a moment, listening. No alarm was raised. Relief washed over them, small but significant, and their courage strengthened. Mistakes could happen, but they would not give up. Not now. They slipped past the guards with near-perfect timing, shadows moving as one. The final door opened to a small outdoor courtyard, where the first rays of the night sky greeted them. The air smelled different, fresh, alive, promising. A whisper of wind seemed to brush against their faces, and in that instant, the children felt the first true taste of freedom, brief yet electrifying. The luminous beings hovered above the courtyard, visible now in faint outlines shimmering against the night sky. The children paused, looking upward, hearts swelling with a mix of awe and relief. For the first time, they felt the full weight of their journey, the fear, the determination, and the hope that had carried them through every obstacle. The beings did not speak, but the children understood perfectly. They were not alone. Freedom, however, was not yet complete. The facility still loomed behind them, humans still inside, and a path to the outside world remained uncertain. The children huddled together, whispering a plan for what came next. They would need stealth, courage, and coordination to move past the facility's outer boundaries. Every step was risky, but they had learned that courage was born not from the absence of fear, but from moving forward despite it. The night stretched on, each moment a delicate balance of tension and hope. The children moved carefully through shadows, using the guidance of the unseen beings to navigate walls, gates, and surveillance. Their journey became a test of patience as much as bravery, each movement deliberate, each decision measured. And yet, with every successful step, confidence grew. They were no longer just survivors, they were active participants in reclaiming their lives. Inside the facility, humans began to realize the extent of what was happening. Alarms were triggered, confusion spread among staff, and suddenly, the carefully constructed order began to unravel. The children had acted, moving with intelligence and precision that no adult had anticipated. Panic and frustration filled the control rooms, but the children were already beyond the first line of human control. Outside, the luminous beings guided them silently, invisible but unmistakable in their presence. They did not touch. They did not interfere directly, but every child felt their encouragement, a quiet force that strengthened resolve and gave courage. The courtyard, once empty and threatening, now became a place of hope, a gateway to the freedom they had long dreamed of. By the end of Part 4, the story had reached a turning point. The children had moved from passive captives to active agents of their own survival. Fear still lingered, danger was still present, but courage, unity, and unseen guidance had given them the edge. They had crossed the threshold, leaving behind the first barriers, yet knowing the path to full freedom was still ahead. This part of their journey had tested them in ways unimaginable. Every obstacle overcome was proof of their resilience, every careful step evidence of their growing wisdom. And while the humans scrambled to understand, the luminous beings continued to provide quiet guidance, preparing for the next phase of the children's journey. The night was far from over, and the story far from complete. What lay ahead would challenge their courage, their morality, and their understanding of trust. But one truth had already become clear. Freedom was no longer a dream. It was a goal, achievable through courage, unity, and the unwavering belief that they were not alone. The night had grown darker, and every shadow seemed heavier than before. The children had crossed the courtyard, leaving the first barriers behind, but the path to true freedom was still fraught with danger. They could see the faint outlines of the outer fence and the distant lights marking the edge of the facility, yet reaching it would not be easy. Every step required focus, courage, and trust, not just in each other, but in the unseen beings who guided them. They paused behind, a low wall catching their breath. Hearts pounded, every small noise amplified in the silence. The children whispered, making sure everyone was ready to move. "We've come this far," one said softly. "We can't stop now. Keep going, stay close, and trust each other." The others nodded, determination flickering in their eyes, stronger than any fear. Meanwhile, the humans inside were beginning to sense that something was terribly wrong. Alarms had been triggered earlier, and now security personnel moved hurriedly, voices echoing through the facility. They did not know where the children had gone, nor did they understand how they had outsmarted every camera and guard. Panic and frustration rippled through the human ranks, but it only made the children's advantage greater. The more chaos humans felt, the easier it was for the children to move unnoticed. The first challenge was the outer gate. It was tall, metal, and heavily monitored. Surveillance cameras glimmered, sensors lined the walls, and 2 guards patrolled the area in an unpredictable pattern. The children had studied this gate for days, and they knew that one mistake could end everything. They huddled together in the shadows, whispering a plan, carefully timing every movement with the rhythm of the guards' patrol. Then, as if on cue, a small shimmer appeared in the darkness. the unmistakable presence of the luminous beings. They did not speak, but their guidance was clear. A faint light shifted in the shadows, showing a path between sensors, marking the safest way forward. The children understood instinctively and moved as one, silent as the night. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. Courage had become second nature, fear had become an ally, sharpening their senses rather than paralyzing them. One child stumbled on a loose stone, heart stopping for a moment. The others froze, but the human guards were momentarily distracted by a malfunctioning camera. Relief swept through the group like a tide. They continued, moving carefully, learning from every small mistake, adapting instantly. Each step brought them closer to freedom, but also closer to discovery. The gate loomed larger as they approached. Sensors blinked ominously, but the children had noticed a pattern. For a few seconds every few minutes, the sensors glitched, creating a tiny window of opportunity. They waited, silent, hearts pounding, then made their move. One by one, they slipped past the sensors, hands gripping each other tightly, moving through the invisible corridor of safety. It was tense, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. Outside, the gate, the real challenge awaited. The facility was surrounded by a wide, open field leading to a dense forest, the only place that offered true cover. The field was exposed, and any human who spotted them could raise an alarm. Yet the luminous beings had prepared them for this moment. A gentle wave of energy, almost like a guiding wind, seemed to point toward the safest path. The children moved, quickly, keeping low to the ground, each step calculated. The humans had begun to mobilize. Flashlights cut through the darkness, dogs barked, and shouts echoed across the field. Panic surged through the children, but it was met with determination. They had come too far to stop now. Each child remembered the lessons of patience, observation, and trust. They ran, crouched low when necessary, and used the terrain to their advantage. The field became a gauntlet, a final test of courage and endurance. One child, tired and frightened, began to fall behind. The others slowed, extending hands, offering encouragement. They had learned that freedom was not achieved alone. Every member of the group mattered. The luminous being's energy seemed strongest here, wrapping around the children like a shield, giving them strength and clarity. They felt invincible not because they were fearless, but because they trusted in each other and in the unseen guidance that had never left them. The forest finally appeared, dark and inviting, full of the promise of safety. Branches scratched against their faces, roots threatened to trip them, yet the children pressed on, hearts beating in unison. The sound of humans behind them grew louder, but it was dulled by the dense trees. The forest became their sanctuary, a place where human eyes could not reach and where their courage could fully shine. As they moved deeper into the forest, relief began to wash over them. For the first time since being taken, the children felt a sense of true safety, yet they remained cautious. They knew the humans might pursue, that danger was never truly gone. But they also knew they had achieved something extraordinary. They had outsmarted and escaped an environment designed to control and confine them. The luminous beings appeared faintly now, hovering above the canopy. Their presence was no longer subtle. It was celebratory, a quiet acknowledgement of what the children had accomplished. The children stopped for a moment, looking upward, feeling a mixture of awe, relief, and gratitude. For years, perhaps, they would remember this moment, the moment when fear gave way to courage, when helplessness transformed into action, and when hope finally became reality. As the night deepened, the children found a safe place to rest. They, huddled together, exhausted but alive. Their whispered conversations were full of relief and wonder. They spoke of the journey, of how far they had come, and of the invisible guidance that had never abandoned them. Trust had been their lifeline, courage their shield, and unity their strongest weapon. The humans, meanwhile, were left to deal with confusion and failure. The alarms had been raised, the search organized, yet the children had vanished. Reports poured in, speculation ran wild, but no one could understand how a group of small, frightened children had outsmarted their entire security system. In there, Confusion, the humans failed to grasp the most important truth. The children had succeeded not through strength or weapons, but through courage, unity, and the guidance of beings beyond their understanding. By the end of Part 5, the story had reached its climax. The children were free from immediate danger, but their journey was not yet complete. They had crossed the first major threshold, escaped the facility, and proved their resilience, yet the world outside still held challenges and unknowns. Their trust, courage, and unity would continue to be tested. But they had discovered a truth that would never leave them. They were capable of extraordinary things even in the face of fear and uncertainty. The night was still quiet, the forest dark and protective, and the luminous beings hovered silently above, a constant reminder of hope and guidance. The children rested, but their minds were already alert, preparing for the next steps in a world that had changed forever. They had escaped the cage, but they were only beginning to reclaim the lives and freedom that had been threatened. The forest had grown quiet, yet alive with the sounds of the night, rustling leaves, distant owls, and the faint whisper of the wind weaving through the trees. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the children could breathe without constant fear. The facility, the alarms, and the humans who had kept them captive were behind them. Yet freedom was not simply about running. It was about understanding, adjusting, and finding a way forward. They gathered in a small clearing, sitting close together. Exhaustion weighed heavily on them, but there was a new energy beneath the fatigue, a quiet pride, a knowledge that they had done something extraordinary. "We made it," one whispered, voice barely audible over the night. "We're free." Heads nodded silently. Freedom was a strange, overwhelming feeling. It was thrilling, terrifying, and beautiful all at once. The luminous beings hovered above, faint and shimmering in the moonlight. Their presence was comforting, almost like a warm embrace without touch. The children looked up, feeling the quiet reassurance of those who had guided them from the start. Though the beings could not intervene directly, their support had been constant, subtle, and powerful. They had taught the children patience, courage, and trust, lessons that no human could have provided. For a while, the children simply sat, listening to the night. They spoke in whispers about what had happened, recalling the fear, the confusion, and the moments of courage that had carried them through. Each story, each recollection, was a small victory, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could shine. They talked about the lessons they had learned, not from books or classrooms, but from experience, observation, and the courage that had grown from necessity. Gradually, they began to move through the forest, seeking a path that would lead them back to the world they had known. Every step was careful, measured, yet more confident than ever. They had learned to trust each other completely, to rely on instinct, and to sense the guidance of the beings above. Even the smallest gestures, holding hands, offering quiet encouragement, sharing food, strengthened their bond and gave them courage for the journey ahead. The forest presented its own challenges. Roots threatened to trip them, branches scratched. Their faces and the darkness made every sound seem louder, more dangerous. Yet the children moved forward together, trusting not only in each other but in the quiet energy that seemed to guide them. Every challenge overcame, every obstacle passed, became proof of their resilience and intelligence. They had grown beyond mere survival. They had become problem solvers, planners, and careful navigators of a dangerous world. In the distance, lights from a nearby town glimmered faintly. For some, it was a symbol of hope. For others, a reminder of the dangers humans could still pose. The children moved cautiously, staying hidden as they approached the edge of civilization. They had learned that freedom did not mean carelessness. Vigilance had saved them once, and it would save them again. One child paused, looking back at the forest. "We're leaving this place behind," the child said softly, voice tinged with both sadness and relief. "But I'll never forget what happened here or what we learned." The others nodded in agreement. They had endured fear, uncertainty, and captivity, yet they had discovered courage, trust, and the value of unity. These lessons would stay with them forever. As they emerged from the forest and approached the edge of the town, they noticed subtle changes in themselves. Movements were more deliberate, decisions more thoughtful, and hearts steadier. Fear was still present, but it no longer controlled them. It had become a tool, sharpening awareness and guiding careful action. The experience had transformed them, not just into survivors, but into stronger, wiser individuals. The luminous beings appeared one last time, hovering above the children. This time their presence felt celebratory, like a quiet acknowledgement of what had been accomplished. No words were spoken, yet the children understood perfectly. They had succeeded. They had reclaimed their freedom, relied on their courage, and trusted one another. They had outsmarted fear, escaped captivity, and navigated a world that had seemed impossible to conquer. As they stepped into the quiet streets of the town, dawn began to break. Soft light spilled over rooftops, streets, and trees, signaling a new beginning. The children paused, taking in the sight. For the first time in days or perhaps weeks, they felt safe, alive, and capable of choosing their own path. The world outside was uncertain, yes, but it was also full of possibilities. Every sound, every light, and every breeze reminded them that life continued, and that they were now part of it fully and freely. They moved through the streets cautiously, looking for someone they could trust. Eventually, they found a kind stranger, someone who noticed their exhaustion and offered help without hesitation. Food, water, and warmth were provided, small gestures that carried immense significance. The children realized that despite the dangers humans could pose, kindness also existed, and it could be found in unexpected places. This recognition, combined with their recent experiences, gave them hope for a world they had once thought too harsh to endure. As the sun rose higher, the children shared their story with the trusted stranger. They spoke of fear, courage, teamwork, and the mysterious beings who had guided them. Though the stranger could not fully comprehend the presence of the luminous watchers, the story itself was enough to convey the depth of their journey. The stranger listened with awe, understanding that these children had endured what few could imagine and had emerged not only alive, but transformed. Later, as they rested in safety, the children reflected on everything that had happened. They spoke of lessons learned, the importance of trust, the strength that comes from unity, the power of patience, and the courage that emerges even in the darkest times. They realized that fear would always exist, but it could be faced, understood, and transformed into action. And perhaps most importantly, they understood that freedom was not simply the absence of cages. It was the ability to choose, to act, and to live fully, despite the challenges that life might present. In the days that followed, the children slowly returned to normalcy, though they were forever changed. They attended school, laughed with friends, and joined family activities. But beneath it all lay a quiet strength, a resilience born from experience. They remembered the facility, the fear, and the escape. But those memories were tempered by the lessons learned. Courage, unity, and hope were far more powerful than any barrier, any confinement, and any fear. And though the luminous beings disappeared from view, their presence lingered in the children's hearts. They had been guides, silent protectors, and reminders that help could come from unexpected places. The children carried forward a sense of wonder and gratitude, a deep understanding that life was fragile, precious, and worth protecting, not just for themselves, but for others as well. By the end of Part 6, the story reached its emotional resolution. The children were safe, transformed by experience, and stronger for everything they had endured. Fear had tested them, captivity had challenged them, and uncertainty had pressed them to their limits. But through courage, trust, and guidance, they had survived. They had reclaimed their lives, embraced freedom, and carried forward lessons that would guide them for years to come. The world had not changed in its entirety, but for these children, everything had changed. They had discovered strength within themselves, the importance of unity, and the undeniable truth that even in the darkest moments, hope and courage could prevail, and as they stepped forward into the sunlight of a new day, they knew that whatever challenges awaited, they had the power to face them and the wisdom to do so together.